Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show on this Memorial Day, Monday. Listen, guys. Okay, I'll give the date today. It's Monday, the 25th of May, 2020. And, I'm going to point out what could be the next Black Swan event. Now, I was on top of the coronavirus before the coronavirus was when it was still in China. I was saying it was a Black Swan event. I don't think it was even out of China yet. I think there's just a few people that had it in China. And I said, hey, this could be our next Black Swan. This could spread around the world. And I give a warning way ahead of time on it. Well, now I'm giving another warning for Black Swans might not just come in ones, like just one black swan. It might come in more than one, two black swans. And I'm giving a warning about what could become the next black swan, but I'm going to tell you guys, this one here is, I'm much more concerned. I was really concerned about this virus. I mean, it's a deadly virus spreading around the world. It was spreading out of China. It was just in China at the time, and I was very concerned. But this potential black swan event that I see could be much worse than the virus itself. It's something that this one really concerns me. Really concerns me. Let's just put it that way. And so I'm gonna have to, for you guys to understand what this next Black Swan event could be, I'm going to have to do a little bit of a lead-in for you guys so that you'll have a full understanding of what it is and where it might be coming from. The first thing we're going to do is a little bit of a history lesson. So let's turn the charts on right here and take a look. Now this is from the History Channel, so it should be a good history lesson. And this picture right here, what we're looking at is the French people, along with a number of soldiers who had deserted, storming the Bastille. Now, the Bastille was the big military of the French, and this basically the people were making war against their own military. That's what happened. Well, let's read a little bit. It says French revolutionaries stormed the Bastille. Parisian revolutionaries and mutinous troops stormed and dismantled the Bastille, the royal fortress and prison that had come to symbolize the tyranny of the Bourbon monarchs. This dramatic action signaled the beginning of the French Revolution, a decade of political turmoil and terror in which King Louis the I can't read Roman numerals, was overthrown, and tens of thousands of people, including the king and his wife Marie Antoinette, were executed. So they had a hunger for revenge. And what really led to all this to happen is there's a transformation that happens to people. Do you remember just a few months back, we had uprisings in places like France, and I mean, these uprisings were what they call protests. We also had large protests in Hong Kong. There's a difference between a revolution and a protest, and that difference comes down to one main thing that excites the people and makes them much, much worse than they are. Okay, the people are upset. The people are tearing things apart when they're in a protest. But when they cannot feed their children, this is the point where they basically lose it. And look at this. Our children. Now, this article was written way back in 2017, May 8th, 2017, But they were already talking. They said food insecurity is a serious problem in America and has long-term effects on our children. When people cannot feed their children, they basically lose it, And what's happened right now is we've created a situation In every country on earth now, I shouldn't say we, the governments have created a situation. We've had nothing to do with it, but I'm talking in general. Humanity in general has created a situation, and to point to the real problem, the people who really created this situation are the people who are in charge. They've created this situation for all of us to deal with, and we're trying to muddle through it as best we can. But the situation that they've created, they're trying to run the world. Like, take a look at this. When does the expanded COVID-19 unemployment insurance run out? Well, yeah, it's going to run out. These payments aren't going to last forever for many Americans. They're getting pretty good payments, right here, but an extra $600 per week, it says, but it ends on July 31st. Okay? Now, we got to think about something here for a minute to take into consideration. Is all of these people who aren't working, they're not producing anything. And an awful lot of the people that are working in the economy, essential workers, people who have to work in hospitals, and people who have to work in grocery stores, and people who have to keep the system running so that we can actually have something on our table to eat. They're not really, a lot of them aren't really producing anything, like in the way of food or anything else. At the same time, we've got our farmers out there, they're not going to be able to get the help needed to pick the fields because of this COVID-19 when the time comes to pick the fields, migrant workers. Everything has been messed up. And it all points toward prices skyrocketing on things because there's going to be shortages of supply. Because supply chain distribution now has been not completely cut, but it's been limited. So on one hand, we got the government pumping out money and putting it into the general economy, and that's going to dry up. We got food supplies and everything that are going to be drying up on the other side. So what it all points to in the end is food security or food insecurity. This is the thing, is food insecurity. This is what it's pointing to. There's a big difference between people when they're protesting and they got dinner at home waiting for them when they get home, and their kids are still eating and everything, That's a protest, and they're going out and they're protesting. They want something. They want something done. They want something better for themselves, so they're protesting for it. There's a big difference between them and people who haven't got any food at home and can't feed their children. That's the difference between a protest and a revolution. And revolutions can take the form now of what happened here in France when they stormed the Bastille, and they quite literally, back in those days, it was royalty, the king and his wife and everything. These were royalty. But now we have the modern day equivalency of royalty is the political structure. But look what happened. It says political turmoil and terror in which King Louis was overthrown, and tens of thousands of people, including the king, his wife, were executed. If you think this can't happen in the modern day, look at what happened not that long ago in Romania. It wasn't that long ago. I remember it very well. Ceausescu in Romania. He didn't get very far. The people came and got him, and that was the end of him. Because it's a revolution. And what I'm really very concerned about is, take a look at Lebanon right now. There are massive protests. The people are in the streets, and they don't have any food to eat. When's this picture going to load? Okay, here. The people are in the streets. This is Lebanon. The people are in the streets, and they don't have any food to eat. And it's a different feeling to the whole thing, other than a normal protest. When this happens, there's a different feeling to it. And the people, they lose their fear then. When they're in a revolution, they lose their fear of the military. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit further in a little bit more detail. What would happen if an extra big, large city, a metropolitan area, went into some sort of a revolution? Well, if it wasn't a protest, real revolution were to happen in a major metropolitan area, an area of say they had 7 or 8 million people, they would have to rush the military in to try to quell the situation, you know. But if the people that were not protesting but actually forming a revolution uh, were different than regular protesters, if they were much more violent, and they called the military, and the military would have a much harder job. Let's just put it that way. And it would require an awful lot heavier military presence. Okay? They would have to, if it was a large metropolitan area, it might require all of the military reservists for a whole region. Okay? I'm not going to give an example in the United States of a large metropolitan region, but they would have to pull the military in from a very large region to cover it. But then what if there was a city only, say, 300 miles away, and it suddenly went into revolution too, while all the military's called into this city that they're working on, the one metropolitan area. Say they call in the military from 500 miles in every different direction to come in and try to quell the protests and revolution in one big major metropolitan area. And while they're dealing with that, a metropolitan area just a little ways away, maybe a couple hundred miles away, then goes into revolution too. Well, the military is already deployed in that one region, and it's taken everybody they got, and then all of a sudden it pops out someplace else too at the same time in another major metropolitan area. What are they going to do? They got no personnel to send in then. Well, I'll tell you what they're going to do. In that case, if that happens, what they will do is they will limit how much military personnel they have in the first city that's went into revolution, and they will barricade the roads in and out of the city. That's what they would do, and they would limit the amount of personnel. They withdraw the personnel that are in the city, and they would focus on barring entry into the city or out of the city while the protests. Basically, this is called in age-old warfare. This is called a siege. So the military would siege the city or besiege the city, right? Then the next city over that just went into revolution, they would rush over there and try to quell the revolution. And if they couldn't, then they would besiege that city. They would siege the cities. And if it spread like a rash across the entire country, all of these big cities would end up being besieged by the military. They would probably park tanks on the roads leading in and out of the city. Park tanks right in the middle of the road. The military would not let anybody in or out. Well, in a situation like that, there's no food getting into the city. There's no water getting into the city. And, with a modern degenerate society like we have today, who need their meds every day, what kind of situation would you have if a city was besieged for a couple weeks or months? What would the situation disintegrate into? If there's basically no law inside the city, but the military's blocked the city off and not letting anybody in or out. Because the limitations of the military, they are limited. They're not unlimited in scope. I mean, if this is spreading to every city, what are they going to do? They're going to try to maintain control where they can maintain control. And they're going to limit their personnel if they don't have unlimited personnel. And this is just the facts of life. So they would besiege the cities. And what would be the toll on human life if, say, a city was besieged for, say, a month? with no water, and uncontrollable people who are just basically. I mean, it could disintegrate into the kind of situation like we've never seen before. Basically, they could burn out the city, or what's left of it, and it would just be a rampage. I mean, that's the kind of situation it could descend into. So this, not protests, but people who are starving going into revolution is a very serious concern to me. And why it's of serious concern is because if the situation is right for this, then it could spread like a rash across the world. So we see it popping out in one place, and the next thing we know, it could start to pop out someplace else as the standard of living continues to rapidly drop. And that standard of living would rapidly drop if the money that's being supplied to the people were to dry up. Suddenly their standard of living would drop. Not drop, it would plummet down to they just got no food for their kids. As this situation starts to spiral out of control, and it very well could spiral out of control. So we have an untenable situation here that could grow into something that is like we've never actually seen before, and a lot of it boils down to food security, and do these kids have something to eat, and do the parents have something to eat? Food security. That's what a lot of this could boil down to. Listen, thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe. Give me a thumbs up, and we'll catch you guys in the next video.